Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning to all my colleagues, seniors, and friends. Uh, Thank you very much for the nice introduction, Dr. Parshuraman, Shreyash Verma ji, my colleagues in SDM, and uh, all my friends. And I'm thankful to the institution, which is not new to me because I have been associated with SDM for more than 2 decades now. And so it's like my home. And I want to thank Dr. Sunil for this opportunity to, to talk to you all. Uh, well, the national policy and its impact on higher education is the subject which I'm to address this morning. Well, there has been in the last couple of months, so many debates, discussions, disagreements, agreements on the national policy on education, which is called the NEP 2020. Well, if you want me to look at this, I will neither take, the extreme stand of criticizing everything that is there, nor am I going to say that everything that is there is new. And when it happens, it will bring a sea change in India's system of education. I would like to first spend some time talking about the structure of the NEP 2020 vis-a-vis higher education, and then go to some of the main points, and then of course conclude my lecture by saying what are the achievable targets that the policy has set for the system of education in India, and where we got to be careful. This would be the kind of framework for my talk today, because I'll be honest with you, one can go on and on and on talking about this. The policy as it has come to us has gone through many drafts, and I am also told that it may change. I don't know at this point of time. But one thing is certain, that it has come for a lot of debate and discussion in various quarters, not just educational institutions, but in civil society as well. So, to begin with, I would start by talking about the current scenario of higher education in India. Now, higher education, as we understood it for a very, very, very long time, and until recently and today also, keeping the policy apart, any level of education, including +2 and above, is called higher education. We have a system of senior high schools, junior colleges, pre-university colleges, as all of us are aware of. So higher education is used synonymously with collegiate education, anything beyond grade 10 or high school. So it's very important to know how, this structure itself, to begin with, I'm saying, is now being altered in the context of a new structure that the National Policy on Education has given. But before that, I think it's relevant to just take a look at the current scenario vis-a-vis higher education by looking at the number of institutions that are functioning in this country. Now, according to one available data, there are about 1,000 universities, I'm quoting, 40,000 colleges, and over 10,000 standalone institutions, as this is recorded in the AISHE portal. of these institutions, 280 are of the affiliating type, it says. 350 are private universities, and a total of about 375 universities located in rural areas, and 15 of them are exclusively for women. The gross enrollment ratio in higher education today is 26.5%, with over 36 million students enrolled in different programs. There is progressive growth, of course, in the number of women, who constitute about 47% of the total enrollment. And it also says in the enrollment of marginalized sections of the society. And with all this, it is still true that the gross enrollment ratio in higher education is much below the global average. Now, I would just want to point out one thing, that as a social scientist, what bothers me is not just the increase in numbers. I'm happy that opportunities for higher education have expanded in India at a rate faster than many other countries across the world, which had universities much before universities in India came into existence. Because all of us are aware of the fact that the first universities in India came in around 1858, when the Woods Educational Dispatch was accepted. And the need for India having its own universities was felt. So in about less than 200 years, if we could have 1,000 universities today in this country, well, that is an achievement. And I'm not undermining that, nor am I saying that it is unimportant or irrelevant. Because given the country's population and given the aspirations of a large number of first-generation learners to get into colleges, to get special types of education that are offered in this country, it's very necessary that a quantitative expansion takes place. But what bothers me, and what we have to bear in mind while talking about the national policy vis-a-vis higher education, as I call it, is that there is a lot of inequality in the type of institutions that we have, in the type of education that these institutions offer, in the facilities provided, and in the kind of teaching learning that goes on. Words like state-of-the-art facilities, words like elite institutions, classy institutions, standalone institutions kind of bother me. They have been used in the national policy also, because I think that education, when the Kothari Commission on Education was accepted in the 1960s, it is considered as an ace document relating to education in India. And when the Kothari Commission report was accepted, the report begins by saying the destiny of India is being shaped in her classrooms. And education is always viewed, in any society for that matter, as what I as a sociologist would call a leveler. Education is the greatest leveler according to me, because this society is an unequal society. It is characterized by hierarchies. It is characterized by deprivation of opportunities to a large number. And education, higher education, still not being accessible to millions of people across the country. Of course, 10, 15 years ago, we used to hear that only about 6 to 7% of the age group that has to be in higher education has actually managed to get in. Today, it says that the number has a little more than 25%. Well, I do not undermine this growth. But in India, for that matter, the constitution, according to me, which is the greatest leveler, has already given us total equal access. But what, kind of is at the back of my mind all the time is that equality of opportunity does not ensure equal utilization of those opportunities. So we all study in different types of institutions. We all get, different types of education. While some have the access to the best of facilities, others don't even have the minimum necessities. Talk about benefits later. So when we talk of higher education, we have to bear in mind the fact that 1,000 universities, 40,000 colleges does not ensure that all those who are in these institutions, and I call them the stakeholders, that includes managements, that includes teaching, administrators, they are called educational administrators, leaders, students, research scholars, teachers, and the administrative machinery, which really is responsible for running day-to-day life in these institutions. They are not all enjoying the same benefits, nor are they enjoying the same kind of facilities. So my first concern about NEP in relation to higher education would be, to what extent is this national policy going to address issues of inequality? To what extent will it bridge the gap, the socio-economic educational gaps between different categories of institutions, as I call them? So in this background, I will now proceed. See, as I mentioned, national education policy has suggested, some slight alterations in the structure of higher education. Well, it's now recommending that higher education starts with either 3-year degree programs or 4-year degree programs with multiple opt-out options. They are called exit options, as all of us are aware. So when, the undergrad degree, as we generally refer to it, is of 3 years duration, then, many go into a postgraduate program or other programs, as the case may be. But the National Education Policy 2020 has created the space, I would say, because basically this document is a vision document. It's talking of many things that can be done, that need to be done. And I also would like to make it clear that many of the propositions in the NEP 2020 are already there in this country. It's not that everything that has come there is new. I would like to make my stand very clear on this. As you read through, you will start feeling, well, this is already here. What is so new about it? But it's already said that many of the visions, many of the desires that the drafting committee, had in mind, or based on various consultations, etc., that are held across the country, the National Policy on Education is envisaging a huge change, is creating the space. Now, who is going to use that space, in what way and for what purpose and to what extent, of course, depends upon various factors, that not all of which are academic, but most of which are socio-economic, cultural. It is group specific, it is location specific, it is economics that is involved in this. Anyway, I come back to that a little later, but I would like to say that the first new thought which the NEP is supposed to put forth is that it is proposing either a 3-year degree program with multiple exit options, like if a student enrolls into higher education, he or she can quit after first year, will get only a certificate, after second year diploma, and 3 years degree. But it is also saying that if somebody wants to go for a 4th year, it's possible that an opportunity for research would be created. A research project can be taken up, and it is also proposing an integrated program, which is already there in many institutions. A 5-year integrated program of 3 years undergrad with an opt-out option and 2 years post-graduation. But my own experience in the university I would like to say that a couple of places it may have worked well, but not everywhere. So the idea of the integrated 5-year program is not a completely new one, is what I would like to say. Number 2, national education policy. The second point that needs to be focused on relates to the stress that it is giving on autonomy, the freedom for institutions and teachers in particular to draft their own curriculum. And it's talking about effective teaching, continuous assessment, student support, student-centric education. Well, I think, because I've been in this profession for more than 4 decades, and I know that these are also, again, not completely new concepts. But it is only in select institutions that teachers have the freedom to form the syllabus that they teach. Because, if a change is really being envisaged by the policy, then it should relate to withdrawal of too much of bureaucratic control on education that you are seeing today. See, many institutions don't have the freedom to form the syllabus. Only autonomous institutions, and more institutions are now being granted autonomy. There are many who do not want autonomy because it has its own repercussions. But autonomic institutions do have the freedom to bring about 20%, 30% change. Now, nobody opposes the idea of autonomy, because academic autonomy, is what gives an institution, according to me, a real standalone kind of a characteristic. And the syllabus is supposed to respond to changes that are taking place in the world around. It's not something that is static. Well, of course, as a teacher, I have always felt that in every subject, there are certain fundamental concepts, theories, ideas, ideologies, which every student and every teacher must be exposed to. But there is also scope. There must be space for dynamism, for change, to include what is going on. We are talking so much about innovations, and the NEP is also laying a lot of stress on innovation. All accreditation agencies are now asking this question: what is this innovation that you can show us? But what do we mean by innovation, basically? I don't think innovation means the same thing for everybody and every type of institution. As I already said in the beginning, there is a serious hierarchy in the very structure of institutions in this country. So, autonomy, innovation, freedom to formulate curriculum, these are, very nice concepts which give you a very nice feeling. But how many institutions can make this operational is a question that we need to ask. When you talk of repercussions of NEP on higher education, this is a question that first we need to raise. And another thing, the concept that has appealed to me most in NEP is about multidiscipline universities. What do they mean by multidiscipline universities? I'm now moving to another new point. See, today we have noticed that the trend is towards what I call monoculture in academic world. You have so many of these theme-based universities for music, for dance, for horticulture, for sericulture, for agriculture. And more are getting included. But I think that the concept of a university means that multidisciplines must come together. The very word university, according to me, signifies an academic space, a learning space, a teaching space, a research space, where people coming from different discipline backgrounds meet each other, learn, unlearn, exchange knowledge. That's not really happening in many institutions. We are now talking of one university per district. Well, the NEP also is hinting that there'll be special educational zones, where special focus will be put on creating institutions of class, whatever that means. But I would say that more institutions, more universities simply means, according to me, and I'll be brutally frank on this issue, given the politicization of education that is taking place in India, there will be only more power centers. So where is the question of quality? Throughout the NEP, one word that stands out, whether it's primary education or whether it is teacher education or it's higher education, one point that stands out is quality. So if, in reality, the vision of the NEP to have multidiscipline universities, to have different, disciplines, management, engineering, humanities and social sciences, pure science, applied science, arts, all, being taught, learned together, that is, according to me, the ideal concept of a university. If that gets operationalized, there will be nothing like that. That is one thing, that has really struck me in this policy. It's not that the idea itself is completely new. People have been actually criticizing, the concept of theme-based monodiscipline universities that are coming up in different parts of the country. But the NEP is talking about, creating multidisciplinary institutions. See, it's using the word multidisciplinary higher education institutions where people from across disciplines will get an opportunity to meet with each other. Because today, we all live in isolated academic ivory towers. If I'm consciously using this word, we have no patience to know about what's going on in other disciplines. When I was a student, my mentors, my teachers taught me the best way to learn, the best way to, enhance your knowledge base is to read books written in other disciplines. Today, there is no patience, forget about multidisciplinary universities, even in monodiscipline universities. There is so much of specialization, and I'm not commenting on that. I'm not saying that it's not necessary. But in these institutions also, students are, so focused on a career, on a future, which I'm not complaining. I'm not saying that's wrong at all. But still, you will find that they have no time. I don't want, they say, I don't want to know. What does it matter to me? What happened in history? What happens in sociology? What happens in management? What happens in engineering? I still remember, how the state of Andhra Pradesh at one point of time removed history because it thought that it was redundant. And who is interested in wars? Is history only about wars? I think history is also about the way knowledge. It's about epistemology. It's about, many things. So if, the NEPs desire that a multidiscipline institution will break these discipline barriers, will, enliven our minds, will expand our thinking capacities, will enable people from different discipline backgrounds to come together, to revisit their own knowledge bases and sources, and come out with a scheme for creating a future generation that has respect for, other disciplines. I would think that that is its greatest achievement. If and when the NEP gets operationalized. See, today, leave alone discipline, leave alone, major disciplines. Within the discipline also you see a hierarchy.
Yeah.
You talk of, for example, I can talk of economics.
Yes.
Quantitative economics is fine. That's why somebody was asking me the other day, why is it that some projects get so much funding whereas others don't? Excuse me, sorry. So I said, with my experience in the university, I would divide, the whole process of research support into three categories. Though projects that deal with people, projects that deal with money, and projects that deal with management. I'm ready to change my opinion if, it's not agreed upon, but the truth remains, I have seen is projects that deal with people, disciplines that deal with people are often, kept at the end. They are what I call as marginalized. Oh, what is the use of that? Money, yes. Management, yes. So, probably the vision of the NEP is that these barriers, these, hierarchy within disciplines, disrespect for certain disciplines must be eliminated. And look at what's happening today. In many institutions across the country, there is no admission for humanities and social sciences, especially this year. Even otherwise, they are in the vulnerable group in many places. And no right-thinking person will ask, what is its use? Science, technology, management, money, everything, is ultimately driven by people's needs. Of course, it's up to teachers, it's up to the academic community in this discipline, humanities and social sciences, to bring to the fore the need for all disciplines to look at society, look at professions, to look at the world from a social science perspective. That I am also very well conscious of. But what I'm trying to convey is that the policy hopes and feels that these, division, the divide, the borders between disciplines will close, and they will, learn to respect each other mutually. And what about institutions like SDM itself, for an example, What does the policy envisage for such institutions? Well, they would say these are now autonomous degree awarding institutions. And the policy envisages that they could evolve into research intensive or teaching intensive universities over a period of time. In the ultimate analysis, what the policy says is that by 2040, all higher education institutions will aim to become, I'm just quoting, multidisciplinary institutions, have thousands of students with adequate infrastructure, and single stream institutions will be phased out. And as I have said, all institutions must become degree awarding, autonomous, multiple discipline universities. Now, in other words, the NEP talks of, I might proceed, but I won't say too much about this because it's repetitive. It is talks of breaking compartmentalization, and it says that institutions, like, it's specifically quoting IITs, but I would add other institutions, management institutions, or other institutions of that nature. They want them to evolve. Now I'm just moving to another new point relating to higher education and NEP. They want all institutions to become, I'm using the word that is there in NEP, holistic institutions. And what is this holistic institution? A holistic institution, fits into the category of the institutions that I mentioned. You see, multiple disciplines, mutual learning process, and developing a sense of respect. Even otherwise, I have read the report, and now you see, I may share with you that in the next stage, they have now constituted 9 committees relating to different areas to suggest how the policy could be operationalized. Well, I am, currently a part of one of these committees on research, innovations, and ranking, because a lot of it, the policy is talking about ranking of institutions. And there is a lot of discussion that is now going on. How do you operationalize the concepts here? Research. That is why I said my own thinking on this when the committee met was that, you see, innovation is a term that needs to be explained. And there is a lot of discussion going on about National Research Foundation. I'll come to that just a little later. Which is envisaged by the policy. So, compartmentalization to be overcome. Now, the other thing, which also is not new to me, other thing which kind of must be done is already being done. Now, when a director spoke in the beginning, he was talking about this point already. The policy talks about what is called community engagement, which has a big repercussion for higher education. See, it's not that the concept of community engagement is new. Community engagement has not been given the place that it should get in our academic work. There are many, many researchers, like in my own discipline and a whole gamut of social science research that is going on in this country. They're all related to what's going on around us. But how much of our research is benefiting local communities? How much of what we are doing is being shared with them? I have always learned, in the course of my research as a sociologist, that research results must be disseminated, But many researchers don't find that word anywhere around them. Why should I share? Take any discipline for that matter, whether it's management, technology, science, humanities. We are mostly blocking whatever we are doing in compartments, not sharing it with the communities at large. And also, it is mostly self-driven. I'm doing my research because I want a PhD. Fine. I'm not saying that that is not necessary. But how many people in the academic world have actually thought of what can be given back to society? The least that we can do is to share our findings, ask in what way the research benefits them. Or, community engagement is also about asking people what they expect from us. We may argue it's difficult. It's not difficult. I would say I have done that. I learned it almost 2 decades ago when working with forest dependent communities. What is it that you expect? And I have always thought, which is already being done. I was recently in South Africa, and I met a colleague in the University of Johannesburg, where I was a visitor. He told me, that my entry into this position has been rather late because my earlier years, I was concentrating on community engagement. And he also said now the attitude to community engagement has changed. And so the work that I did with, this professor has done a lot of work with trade unions, civil liberties movements, etc. He said that, counted a lot. And that's what the national education policy is saying, that higher education should inculcate an environment in the institutional setup as well as in individuals who are part of that setup, that community engagement is necessary. Like, going and it's not charity, definitely not. It's about sharing. And I will go one step further. I've been talking about it and saying even during the COVID times, that inequality has manifested itself glaringly, with those in the comfort zone getting their salaries, lakhs of rupees, work or no work. And there are hundreds and thousands and millions who used to struggle day in and day out, who don't have a paise today. There is what is called as lapsing back to poverty that is on. Many who had been with a lot of effort, with some good salaries, had managed to get into the middle class, have lapsed back into poverty simply because they have no means of support. So I think that this stress on community engagement, which the national education policy is talking about, especially in institutions of higher education, that's a vision which must become a reality. And it's also laying special stress on environment and value education. And I think that values do change. There's nothing like there are some values that are, time specific. There are also those that are culture specific. There are also those that are timeless. But values also change. The system of values is changing. So what is called a social good, I think, is what the national policy is emphasizing. And there are 2-3 other points which I'll quickly run through and stop. The other thing that it's talking about is internationalization, which according to me is not completely new, not new either. Because, especially in the last 10 years, 15 years, one of the criteria that accreditation institutions are setting apart is about diversity. See, unfortunately, there is too much of localization that is taking place in our education system. What I call as a sociologist as, it's not a new word, everybody knows that, the next door policy is very much there in our minds. But if you look at the way, India is changing, you will find that in many of these institutions, considered, where you have a tough entrance process that is on to get in, why students of certain regions of this country that are suffering from infrastructural, economic, social, natural hazards have done very well because they are challenged. They are on the move. This is within the country. But the National Education Policy says that higher education institutions must concentrate now on building their international student clientele. They are calling it internationalization. What is you allowing foreign universities? That debate is on for such a long time. It's not new either. But it says the policy has said every university, every institution must have an international office. They should open up to more international students, and also, create special facilities for these students. They should have collaboration with foreign universities. Well, I think these are not new. Nothing is new, according to me, in this, because, I was director of the Mysore University's international programs for 10 years. So I'm very, very familiar with the way this system operates. And I always argued, that the word international student, again, is not homogeneous. Students coming from the Western world, students coming from emerging economies, they don't have the same facilities, right? So what about the fee that is being charged? Of course, I know globally for international students, there is a different fee structure, but there are countries which are placed in worse economic situations than ours. And so you can't just have one single criterion and bring them in. So internationalization would mean that you have to do a lot of work which only few institutions can afford. And I'm also sorry to say that there is a whole I'm consciously using this word, so I don't feel bad. There are kind of rackets that have developed around internationalization, and that should be stopped. We should be very, very serious about this. And the NEP is talking about student exchange, not a new concept either. But I know, and all of us know by experience, that this exchange is usually from outside to India and not from India to other countries. It may be there, but it's always kind of lopsided. So the question of costs, the question of support, and the question of giving quality. Now earlier, the name of the university sent kind of messages. But today I know international students who want to come to India are looking for, grades that the institution has received, the facilities, the hostel, etc. So internationalization is definitely welcome. Definitely we will be happy. But I would say, out of my own experience, that at no cost we should sacrifice quality. We should not make any amends when it comes to admission, to language learning, to grades, etc. And of course, the policy, I'll just only quickly run through this because it's all there already. It's talking a lot about student support in the form of scholarships, form of economic support, and one point that has come in for a lot of discussion in this national education policy is about the use of the word philanthropic that the policy has used, where it says that aid or support, when it comes from certain institutions, especially the corporate institutions, because one of the concerns that is being expressed is about the corporatization of higher education. And what will follow? And questions are being asked about how the word philanthropic support, from corporate bodies in the guise of private-public partnership will actually help the poor, the vulnerable, the marginalized is a big question that is being asked in the context of NEP. And the last two other points that I would make, as I said, one relates to the newly proposed National Research Foundation, which is called the NRF. See, today you have multiple bodies, like UGC, AICTE, many of these bodies supporting research. Now the national education, this is especially very, very important for us, and it is going to have serious repercussions on higher education vis-a-vis research. That the National Research Foundation has been proposed as, one kind of what I call a single window to monitor, to finance, to set the agenda, as I call it, for research. And now discussions are on, especially stakeholder consultations about what they expect from this National Research Foundation. And serious doubts are being expressed about its composition. Now, many people are openly coming out with this reaction that it should not be bureaucratized and politicized. I'm not personally attacking anybody, but the truth, one of the grim realities with which the academic world is living today is that often educational decisions are being taken by, educational governance is being handed over to people who have absolutely no knowledge about academics or education. And too much of bureaucratic interference. On the one hand, the policy is talking about autonomous institutions, autonomy to formulate syllabus, autonomy to do this and autonomy to do that. And here you have these bureaucratic interference, political interference. And, I do not want to just say certain things by using harsh language because it's unbecoming of a teacher to do that. So I'm being polite when I say political is much more than bureaucratic intervention. And, in this particular context, when issues of caste, issues of favoritism, issues of region, all these are deciding who gets into what position, who does what, who takes academic decisions in many public institutions, especially. Grants are being withheld for various reasons, whereas they are being pumped into certain other avenues. So this point by the NEP, that there will be one single body to control research or, to monitor research, needs to be seriously considered. And now already, because I said I'm part of this group that is looking into this issue, most people who have reacted have said that this body should have only academics, people, educational administrators who have experience of educational governance and research. Now, another last thing that they are proposing is to have a higher education commission. Again, this is kind of, I suppose, you see, there are multiple points of control today. And so to stop that, they'll have one body, like UGC is one example that I can give. But there are many, many others that are functioning today, NCTE, AICTE, University Grants Commission, many, many bodies. So probably they are saying that there is always this conflict of interests that is on, or conflicting guidelines, conflicting operational procedures. So they are proposing that they will have something called a National Commission of Higher Education Commission of India. They want to call it Higher Education Commission of India. So these are some of the points that I thought must be just, brought up when we are talking about national education policy in relation to higher education. As I have noted in the beginning itself, many of these things are not completely new concepts. The more stress, I think, must now be laid on how we implement these visions, because already this comment is coming up that there are too many suggestions and too many dreams. Yes, we must dream. I as a sociologist, dream a lot about a society that should be this. I'm sure all of us have dreams, not just for ourselves, but for what surrounds us. But how do you operationalize those dreams, those visions, whatever you want to call them? And I would say, how do we set right the inequality that is inbuilt into this system? Is it just by creating new universities, by giving autonomy to institutions, by forcing them to accept autonomous status? No. We need to create, this also the policy says, we need to create excellent educational, an excellent system of what they call educational governance, because what needs to be done is effective governance in the form of leaders who can be mentors, who can guide students, teachers, and all stakeholders of education to, think differently and act differently. That is the need of the hour. And the policy has taken note of this, because basically what is this policy? It's a roadmap. And in many places, you will find, there are some friends and colleagues who have even already done, it's not a difficult thing to do. They've said, this word comes 500 times, this word comes 200 times, but then tell us what to do. How do we move? So I hope that once we are able to bring out, definite operational strategies, some progress could be achieved. And so thank you very much for this opportunity. And I hope I just have shared with you my thoughts on this. Thank you. And back to Sunil. Thank you very much.
Thank you.